Hi everybody, Dr. Bill Crawford here, psychologist, speaker, author of 7 books, host of 2 PBS specials. And what you're about to see is a video version of a presentation I've had the pleasure of doing around the country. Originally what I do is I go around and I talk to people about dealing with stress. We can actually call this sometimes life from the top of the mind. It's a philosophy, a framework, a system that I've been working on over the last 27 years. I've actually written a book called Life from the Top of the Mind, and it's one of the things I love to do. And so when my son Nick, who is now in the BFA acting program at Texas State, told me about kind of the program, I said, hey, well, you know, I would be happy to come and do my presentation to the theater department. So I talked to the folks there. They were very enthusiastic of me coming. So I came and did my material on Life from the Top of the Mind, and they just loved it. And it was so wonderful for me because as a speaker, to see people kind of react to my material that way is just really, really meaningful. So as a result, I've actually written a book called Freeing the Artistic Mind. It takes my Life from the Top of the Mind material and adapts it to performing artists, especially people who are in school, dealing with a lot of stress from what I understand. As a result of my doing that with Texas State, I've had the pleasure of doing this with Carnegie Mellon and Ryder and Shenandoah and Otterbein and Ohio Northern and a lot of wonderful programs around the country. And we thought we would shoot a video version of this for you, so in case I don't get to come to your organization, you would have this material. So the idea is to really look at this in a broad way. I can call this the science of dealing with stress in people in life. So sure, we're going to talk about stress at the very beginning, but we're going to broaden this out to stress and people in life, anything that gets in the way of your clarity, your confidence, and your creativity. I like that freeing the artistic mind, however. It's the idea of me giving you material that frees you to be who you are, do what you love for the rest of your life. Now, one of the things I want to do is kind of start with what would you like to get out of this material? I found the more when we go into a situation, if we're really clear about what we want to get out of it, that it makes the whole experience so meaningful. So get out your handout, and you'll notice on the first page of the handout, there are 3 boxes. One of them is blank, leave that blank for the moment. The other says problems and triggers, and the other should say reactions. So what I want you to do, we're going to stop the video in a moment, what I want you to do is write down any situation in the past that has triggered your stress, or any situation in the future you think might trigger your stress. And this is going to be your takeaway. Anything you write down in that box under problems and triggers, you should be able to deal with differently at the end of the presentation. Once you've made your list, then write down how you found yourself reacting to this stuff in the past. Again, has it been stress or frustration or anxiety or worry or fear or feeling overwhelmed or depressed or anxious? Anything, again, that has gotten in the way of your clarity, confidence, and creativity. Because this is going to be your takeaway. Anything you write down in that reactions list, you should be able to deal with more successfully at the end of the presentation. Do this now, stop the video, and we'll start when you get done. Okay. Now you've made your list, you've got all of those situations that in the past have triggered your stress, and you've got your reactions. What I want to do is make sure that I'm applying my material to your real life situations. So I wrote down some things that other theater students have told me actually represent some of the things that they have found challenging and how they have found themselves reacting. So they talked about auditions in the school in general and parents and relationships and not having enough time and peer pressures and body image and lack of sleep and all the things that go on. So here's what I want you to do. Just imagine that whatever you wrote down on your particular list is on this list. If it's not, just imagine that it is and this will work. So great. So how do you find yourself reacting to all those things? Well, gosh, we get stressed and we get frustrated. Sometimes we get angry, certainly tired, exhausted, overwhelmed, sometimes sad or depressed, obviously feeling overwhelmed, worried, frightened, annoyed. And again, if you have something else on your list, just imagine that this is on this list and this will work. So here's what's important about dealing with all of this. We have to understand that these 2 lists are related to each other chronologically. In other words, this happens first and it triggers this reaction, right? Which would be bad enough if it stopped there, but have you noticed that it doesn't? Because when this situation triggers this reaction, have you noticed the situation seems to get worse? The difficult people are more problematic. The parents, the auditions, the no time, the lack of sleep, which of course triggers another reaction. Which of course makes it seem worse, which triggers another reaction and makes it seem worse and reaction and worse, reaction and worse, reaction and worse, reaction and worse until something explodes. I call this the cycle of stress, frustration. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not here to say we have no right to feel this way. These are very understandable. As I go around the world teaching this material now, stressed, frustrated, angry, tired, sad, depressed, overwhelmed, very, very understandable. It's just that most people come to me and say, Bill, I don't want to feel stressed and tired and angry and sad. And could we also put resentful over here? Don't we kind of resent dealing with this stuff? There's a cute quote on resentment you might like that says, resentment is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. I love that because resentment, frustration, anger, depression, all of it's very understandable. But rather than it helping us deal with the situation, it makes the situation seem worse, which triggers another reaction, and we find ourselves trapped in this cycle. So given that this is so common, what I think we need is an uncommon solution, something you haven't heard before. I love this quote from Albert Einstein that says, problems cannot be solved at the same level of awareness that created them. I like that because it speaks to the importance of this being new. And I think it may also speak to why we find ourselves trapped in this cycle. We may be trying to solve the problem at the same level of awareness that created it. In other words, when we see stress as the problem, and by the way, I'm going to call all of this stress, and this as the cause, then whenever we feel stressed, angry, frustrated, we go in here, try to change the cause. Ever try to change parents or peers or school? Have you noticed? It's kind of hard to do. So I'm not saying we can't be influential over here, but the idea of seeing stress as the problem and this as the cause will forever trap us in this cycle. So unlike most people who talk about stress, I come at the subject from a very different perspective. In fact, I'm going to suggest that stress isn't the problem. In fact, I'm going to suggest that stress is a big part of the solution. That's weird, isn't it? Well, there's a quote I love that speaks to this, and I love this next quote mostly because I said it. It says, stress is a signal something needs to change. Suffering is when we don't make the change. I love that because it begins to differentiate stress from the problem to a valuable signal. Kind of like we're driving down the road, a little red light comes on our dashboard. That little red light isn't the problem. It's there on purpose. We may not be thrilled that it's there, but we're grateful that it's there. It's a valuable signal that lets us know something needs our attention. When we pay attention to it and act upon it, things are fine. When we ignore it, things start to break down. So one way of breaking this cycle is to understand that stress, all of these reactions, is actually a valuable signal that something needs to change. The next thing we need to understand is exactly what stress is, because we've been given some bad information about that. We've been told stress is what something or someone does to us. Auditions stress us out. School stress us out. Parents stress us out. Relationships stress us out. And the good news is that's not true. Because if that were true, we would have to change all this before we could feel any differently. What stress really is actually just a series of chemical changes in our body. Those chemicals, for the most part, are adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. Don't really need to remember exactly what that is, other than that's what stress is, a series of chemical changes in our body. Matter of fact, if we look at the relationship between stress and productivity, what we find is when there's zero stress in our life, there's zero productivity. It's called sleep. Not real productive while we're sleeping. Now, while we're sleeping, there is very little adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol going throughout our body. Guess which three chemicals wake us up in the morning? Adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. So for a while in the morning, as our stress goes up, our productivity goes up. We're more productive 3 hours after we wake up than we are 3 minutes after we wake up. And that's because of these natural, normal, healthy chemicals going throughout our body. This is what's called good stress. It wakes us up, it gets us going, it motivates us. Most people don't have enough problem producing enough good stress in their life. What happens with most people, especially those of us that get trapped in this cycle, is as these chemicals continue to go up, our stress continues to go up, productivity starts to go down and down until we kind of crash and burn down there somewhere. This is where we implode, we explode. This is where burnout happens. So the first thing I want to do in this video is to help raise your level of awareness of when you first feel pushed over the top. When you first start going from your most productive into this downward spiral. And then because we now know that stress is a series of chemical changes in our body, in this first part of the video, I'm going to actually show you how to change the chemical makeup of your body when you find yourself stressed. That's going to allow you to bring yourself back into what I call the zone of productivity. Now, you can bring yourself back at a high level, medium level, low level. That is totally up to you. I just want you to be in charge of it versus these people or these situations being able to make you feel that way. Now, what I've also found is that in order for information to be effective, the brain needs to see it in a certain way. In other words, there's a criteria. It's got to be new. If I just tell you what you already know, that's not going to be helpful. Like, okay, get more rest and go exercise more and eat better. Well, yeah, but we already know that. So I want to tell you new things. It needs to be visual. You need to be able to picture this in your mind, exactly what's going on. It needs to be backed by science, so I'm not just up here making this up. It needs to be congruent with your values and what you value. So if you already have a system or a philosophy, a religious perspective, whatever, that is meaningful in your life, this should fit right in there with it. And obviously, it needs to increase your influence. That is my goal, to help you become more influential in your life and in the lives of others. So the material that I'm bringing to this new perspective has to do with how the brain processes information. Now, the brain is rather complex. People spend their lives talking about the brain. We don't want to do that today. What I've done is I've broken the brain down into 3 parts that do very different things, and I want to show you what they are and how you can influence what is going on and therefore influence the quality of your life. For instance, lower part of the brain is called the brainstem. This is where our fight or flight responses are located. It's the part of the brain that regulates our muscle tension, heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, etc. Middle part of the brain is called the limbic system. This is where our emotions are triggered for the most part, but it's also the part of the brain that acts as a gatekeeper. Or in today's terminology, it acts as a scanner, a processor, and a router. It scans incoming data, processes it, and then either routes it down to the brainstem or up to the upper 80% of the brain, the neocortex, where we have access to our interpersonal skills, problem-solving skills, clarity, confidence, creativity, compassion, etc. So again, this is how it works. Data comes in from our 5 senses, and it is first scanned by the limbic system. If the limbic system doesn't see a problem, got a remote here in my hand, no problem. Sends the data on up to the neocortex, brainstem works in the background, regulating breathing, muscle tension, heart rate, blood pressure, everything's fine. But if the limbic system senses anything or anyone it doesn't like, anything or anyone it has determined to be a problem or a trigger or a stressor or a threat of any kind, or anything or anyone that is similar to any problem, trigger, stress, or threat we've ever experienced in the past, it sends the data immediately down to the brainstem, bypassing the neocortex. Now at this point, the brainstem can only do 2 things. Fight or flight, which means our blood pressure goes up, muscle tension goes up, heart rate goes up. We get ready to strike out of withdrawal, that fight or flight response you've heard so much about. In the latest brain research, this is called downshifting because it happens so quickly. And again, what we need to know is that it bypasses the most intelligent, capable, loving, caring, clear, confident, creative part of who we are. If you've read any of Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence, he calls this neural hijacking or emotional hijacking. Some people call it amygdala hijacking because it's that part of the limbic system. Regardless of what it's called, what is happening is we are being thrown into a part of the brain that doesn't allow us to be influential in our lives and in the lives of others. So now we know this blood pressure, muscle tension, heart rate are all driven by these chemicals, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. These chemicals manifest themselves as stress, frustration, anger, tired, depressed, overwhelmed, worried, frightened. And when we try to deal with life from this perspective, life seems to get worse, except difficult people. They don't seem to get worse. They do get worse because we've just become their trigger. Without really meaning to, we are driving them deeper into their resistant brain. So when this happens, either when situations seem to get worse or people do get worse, the limbic system goes, whoa, more negative data, didn't mean for that to happen, sends it right back down to the brainstem. And now you can see how this external cycle is replicated by this internal cycle. And it's not like this happens every once in a while. This can become a lifestyle for us, and we can find ourselves trapped in this lower 20% of the brain, trying to deal with rather complex personal and interpersonal situations from this very limiting part of the brain. Newsweek and Discover did a pretty nice job of this, especially right after 9/11. They looked at how stress, frustration, fear, anxiety not only changes the chemical makeup of our body, but actually influences how our brain processes information. Now you can't walk through the magazine aisle at Barnes & Noble or Hudson News at the airport without seeing 20 magazines on the brain. This is the cutting edge. If you want to be more influential in your life and in the lives of others, be able to access that clarity, confidence, and creativity, regardless of the situation, you got to know what's going on here, and most importantly, how you can influence the process. Therefore, since this is where we start, this is so common, here's what I've done. I've created a model that's going to show you whenever you find yourself trapped in that lower 20% of the brain, I'm going to show you how to shift from the brainstem up into the neocortex and actually change the chemical makeup of your body from adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol to serotonin and endorphins, the chemicals that help us think clear and feel better. And I call this philosophy life from the top of the mind. It's what I get to go around the world teaching. It's what I'm looking forward to teaching to you today. Let's look at this in just a little less technical way. Basically, what we want to be able to do is to access our best regardless of the situation. Now we know our best comes from this upper 80% of the brain. And when we're in this upper 80% of the brain, kind of like we all are right now, everybody's feeling okay, brainstem, limbic system work very nicely in the back, regulating breathing, muscle tension, heart rate, blood pressure, everything's fine. The problem happens is when the limbic system starts interpreting situations as a problem, because when it engages the lower 20% of the brain, it numbs or blocks access to that upper 80% of the brain. That has us then feeling anxious and stressed and frustrated and defensive, resentful. This is now driven by certain chemicals. When we try to deal with life from this perspective, life seems to get worse. The limbic system sees this as a big problem, and this is the problem. Where the limbic system is interpreting life in a way that's throwing us into this lower 20% of the brain, blocking our ability to access all we can. So this is the solution. This is what I call my TED slide. If I were going to do a TED talk, this is what I would do. Because here you have that limbic system, that middle part of the brain. You've got all the qualities and characteristics we want to access, and we've got a sense of how, when the limbic system interprets life in such a way that it throws us down into that bottom part of the brain, how we find ourselves feeling anxious, frustrated, resentful based on these chemicals. Now, here's the problem. The limbic system and the brainstem, this lower 20% of the brain, are unconscious. We're not doing this on purpose, we just find ourselves doing it. And so we've got to fix that. Matter of fact, there's a quote from Carl Jung that says, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life, but you will call it fate." So we want to have more influence, more control in our life, so that we can bring our best to life regardless of the situation. That means we've got to raise that unconscious part to consciousness so that we are being more influential with how the limbic system interprets life and what part of the brain is engaged. So this is a three-part system that I'm going to show you how to do this. The first one is how to shift. When you find yourself in that lower 20% of the brain, I'm going to give you a behavioral model that's going to show you how to shift from the brainstem to the neocortex, change the chemical makeup of your body. And then I want to show you how to stay there, so you don't just find yourself falling back down into the brainstem every time you find yourself dealing with one of these triggers. Then I want to show you how to get other people, especially those people that you want to really hear and understand what you're saying. How do you get them to shift from their resistant brain to their receptive brain so they can truly hear and understand what you're wanting them to know? The first model we're going to work with, I call it C cubed. Stands for clarity, confidence, creativity. This is what's called a top of the mind or a neocortex model. I think we can look here and see there's not a lot of clarity, confidence, and creativity going on here. Plus, this is a developmental model, meaning we got to have clarity before we can access our confidence. And we've got to have clarity and confidence before we can access our creativity. And I know how important creativity and accessing that and confidence is to those of you watching this video. You are now much more clear about the problem. You know things about the problem that only about 5% of the people on the planet know. 95% of the people on the planet thinks this makes me this. You now know this is interpreted by a certain part of my brain in such a way that triggers a chemical change in my body, and this is the result of that. So what we've got to do is regain control, because a lot of people say they feel out of control when they're trapped in that cycle. The problem is when most people try to regain control, they try to control this so they won't feel this. And that doesn't work, especially with people. Matter of fact, I'm going to encourage you never to tie your peace of mind to another person's state of mind. You want to be able to access that and have that influence in your own life regardless of what's going on around you. So when I'm talking about regaining control, what I'm talking about is our neocortex regaining control from our brainstem. Now, brainstem controls heart rate. That's kind of hard to control. Our brainstem controls muscle tension. That's kind of hard to control. And blood pressure. That's kind of hard to control. Our brainstem controls breathing. That is not hard to control. That's why if you've ever had any yoga or meditation or anything like that, breathing was probably part of that. So what I want you to do first is breathe deeply. And deeply is important. I had someone come to me after a seminar and said, "Hey, Bill, I tried your breathing thing and it didn't work." I went, "Really? What happened?" He said, "Well, I was really stressed and I went, and I was still stressed. It didn't work." I went, "Okay, I think I know what's going on." It's got to be a slow breathing. I call it the 5x5 method. I'm not sure if you've ever heard if your mom and dad said, "Hey, if you ever get upset, before you do anything or say anything, count to 10. Well, there's only one part of the brain that can count. Plus, normally our brainstem is controlling our breathing. So when we inhale for a count of 5 and exhale for a count of 5, what's happening is we're having that neocortex take over a function normally controlled by the brainstem, and we're activating the only part of the brain that can count. Very powerful process in having the neocortex regain control. Now, a lot of people talk about the fact that a lot of muscle tension is involved in here. I'm not sure if you've ever noticed going into an audition or situation, if you ever feel kind of tight and tense. So you can make this even more powerful by using the word relax on the exhale, because normally the part of the brain that controls muscle tension is the brainstem. So when you breathe, and then on the exhale, say the word relax. Relax. It has the brain, the top of the mind, the neocortex, taking over 2 functions normally controlled by the brainstem. Let me show you what that feels like. Everybody take a deep breath. Hold it, and say the word relax on the exhale. Wouldn't it be great if every audition started like that? Every difficult conversation started like that. See, it's a wonderful way where you can do 2 simple things. Now, you may need to do it more than once, may take a few times, but the idea is you are having this upper 80% of the brain now take over 2 functions normally controlled by the lower 20% of the brain. This deals very nicely with the physiological components of stress. Let's look at what I call the 2 most prominent psychological components of stress. The first one is our tendency to ask BS questions. BS stands for brainstem, by the way. Like, what is wrong with these people? Or why do I always screw up in an audition? Or how come my people don't like me? And what is wrong with my body? And how come I can't sleep? And what is this with relationship? Understandable, but that has us going to that lower 20% of the brain. And the brain will attempt to answer any question we ask it. It doesn't determine, is this a good question or a bad question? It will answer any question we ask. So if we're talking about a difficult person, we say, well, what is wrong with these people? Our brain goes, well, they're just stupid idiots. They never. And that's not helpful. Or if we say, well, what is wrong with me? Why do I get so nervous every time I go into an audition? Our brain says, well, you're just a stupid idiot. There's nothing, In other words, we're asking questions that we really don't want the answer to, or at the very least don't help. So what I suggest we do is breathe, relax on the exhale, and ask what I call neocortex questions. Questions that can only be answered by the upper 80% of the brain. I'm going to give you a lot of those during this seminar, but the easiest, the most simple one is, okay, how would I rather be feeling? If I don't want to feel stressed and frustrated and angry and depressed and overwhelmed, how would I rather be feeling? Calm, confident, in control, whatever. Great question, but it isn't powerful enough because when we're trapped in this cycle, we are worried about something, aren't we? We're worried about the audition. We're worried about schools, parents, relationships, not enough time. And worry is a very insidious experience. It kind of takes us over. There's a quote that I found that you might find valuable. It says, worry begins as a thin stream of fear trickling through the mind. If encouraged, however, it cuts a channel into which all other thoughts are drained. The key word here is if encouraged. It's not that we'll never worry again. I mean, we'll find ourselves worrying. The question is, do we feed it? There's a quote that came to me when I was working with a client that says, it's not what we feel, but what we feed that creates our experience of life. Because often what happens is when we feel this, we go over here to find the cause of it, which feeds this cycle. We don't want to do that. Plus, it really doesn't help us deal with the situation at hand. There's another quote I love that says, worry doesn't empty tomorrow of its troubles. It empties today of its strength. And now we know why, because it throws us into this very limiting part of the brain. Now, if you happen to be in a fight or flight situation, worry is a great thing. If someone is coming at you with a gun, don't give them a group hug. It's just not a good idea. Run away. If someone's driving the wrong way towards you on the freeway, get off the freeway. That's something you should be very worried about. But notice how few of the situations that we deal with on a regular basis are truly fight or flight in nature. Matter of fact, most of us need access to our clarity, confidence, and creativity to be successful. Plus, worry triggers cortisol. That's the big one in the stress hormone. Because the job of cortisol is to rush throughout our body, shutting down our immune system, so we're more susceptible to illness, shutting down our digestive system, that's where ulcers and stomach problems come from, shutting down our production of protein, which is what the brain functions on, and increasing our production of glucose. Because in a fight or flight situation, glucose is where we get our energy. But remember, we're not in a fight or flight situation. So when we get trapped in this cycle, what we're sitting here doing is producing more and more and more glucose. Glucose is sugar, by the way. That's why if you've ever kind of worried for any length of time, start feeling anxious or nervous, kind of like eating too many candy bars, it's because we're getting that sugar overload. Especially if what we're worried about isn't happening at the moment. And just think back of all the things that we were worried about. How many of them were really happening at that moment? But it can really mess with our health. There is a cartoon I found of a tombstone that said 90% of what killed me never happened. And what that speaks to is how when we find ourselves worrying about stuff all the time, we're really compromising our body's ability to deal with life. So what we want to do is to recognize exactly what's going on. When we are worried, what is happening is that lower 20% of the brain is interpreting life in such a way that's throwing us into the fight or flight part of the brain. But chances are what we're worried about isn't happening at the moment and may not even be real. There's an acronym for fear that's called false evidence appearing real, FEAR. That a lot of people really like because we can ask ourselves the question, okay, is this happening at the moment? Do I absolutely know this is going to happen this way? Does worrying about it really help me in the moment? So I'm going to suggest what we do is breathe, relax on the exhale, ask how I'd rather be feeling, and then the key is to imagine feeling this way. Because when we're worried, we generally have a pretty powerful picture of what we're worried about. And that picture in our mind is a very powerful tool. Some people think our imagination isn't a big deal. You know how powerful imagination is. You are in the business of imagination. But let me take you through an exercise and I want to show you how powerful imagination is. I want you to take your hand, hold it up to your mouth like this. I know it's weird, but humor me, you'll enjoy it. Imagine you have in your hand a lemon. See that bumpy yellow rind of the outside of the lemon? Now we slice the lemon in half and there's lemon juice running down our hand, You can see the shiny yellow pulp of the inside of the lemon. If you squeeze the lemon, juice squirts up. Now everybody take a big bite of your lemon. All right, you can put your lemon down now. Did you notice what happened? Just saliva muscles. Some people are going, well, help, sugar, whatever. Because what's happening is you have just changed the chemical makeup of your body. Anything that happened as a result of you imagining what you just bit into, imagining biting into a lemon, was a chemical change in your body. And you knew you weren't really biting into a lemon, but your body reacted as if you were. What that says is the body will react chemically to any image we hold in our mind. So let's assume you're going to school and somebody that you don't really know kind of criticizes you at the very beginning of the day. And you go, and you get really upset. And the next person you see, they say, well, how's your day? You would not believe somebody just came up to me and told me that they had no right to do that. And you tell the story. And then you go to lunch with someone else and they say, yeah, well, and this morning someone came up to me and they said, ba-bum, ba-bum, and you tell the story. Then later on you go back to your roommate and say, well, how was your day? And you tell the story. We have just made that person, someone we don't know and maybe we'll never see again for the rest of our life, the most important person in our life. Because every time we tell that story, what happens is we trigger those chemicals. We have just given that person permission to throw those detrimental chemicals into our body in a way that we don't want to give them that kind of power. So if we breathe, inhale for a count of 5, exhale for a count of 5, say the word relax on the exhale, ask how I'd rather be feeling, imagine feeling that way. Who am I when I am calm and confident and in control? Who am I when I am pleased with kind of how I feel and what's going on? Then we want to imagine being that way and then notice the change. This is really powerful because at this point in the model, you will be feeling more clear, more confident, more in control than you did at the beginning. And then if you need to repeat the model, you can do this in a powerful way. So again, another neocortex question we can ask ourselves. By the way, this is the brain model. I like my models to spell things, B-R-A-I-N. What we want to ask ourselves is, how important is our peace of mind? How important is our clarity of mind? I think it ought to be one of the most important things we affect because it's going to affect every aspect of our life. This model is something you can do anywhere, anytime. It will give you the power to not only shift from the brainstem to the neocortex and change the chemical makeup of your body, but make sure you're able to go into the next situation from the top of the mind. So here we have part 1 put all together for you. Whenever you're ready, we'll go to the next part, how to stay in the clear, confident, creative part of